I want you to imagine this. Your goal is not to beat everybody. It is not to beat yourself. It is to find the level of perfection such that you can place your drone in the same space at a different time with the ultimate reproducibility. That, my friends, is what defines a top racer. And we get to hear Thomas talk a lot about it today. Before we get going, I do just want to drop in that, you can join my Patreon. If you like what I do, if you want to support me, links in the description below. If you join my Patreon, you get a podcast and you also get access to my Discord. I hope that you all enjoy it. I can spend a lot of time on this. See you soon. So, it was obviously hard for you to put yourself into the top 4, or I guess we ended up being like top 5 or 6, but it's interesting. I'm curious if you've ever heard of imposter syndrome.
No, I haven't heard of that.
Okay. So this is something that I dealt with for the longest time. And I didn't know what it was or what it did until I heard until I saw something my good friend wrote about it. He's now my CEO. And I'm a software engineer. I went to a school, ECU, that there's nobody working in the California tech industry from ECU. Maybe 2 or 3 of us, right? Not well known for computer science. I just kind of got lucky over and over again, right? And I ended up working for a startup in Silicon Valley called Flurry. And so I'm here in Virginia Beach, and I started working for Flurry, and this is the big leagues, right? I'm not working for the government anymore where you can just kind of half-ass it. I'm working for a venture-backed startup that is the biggest, largest mobile analytics provider in the world.
Oh, that's cool.
And I freaked out. First 6 months, I was working 12, 14-hour days. I was working out of the bedroom in our house at the time. And I was just convinced that they were going to fire me. Because what I knew that they didn't know was that I just kept getting lucky, right? I knew a few good tricks and I could get by on those few good tricks. And if anybody ever figured out that I just knew a few good tricks, they would know that I was a fraud, right? And then Sean, he's now my CEO, he writes this article, and in that, or the blog post, whatever, in that blog post, he describes exactly what I felt, which is, if you ever sit down and you see yourself as a high performer and you're pretty convinced that you're just a fraud and that you are only where you are because you've either gotten lucky a few times or you know a few tricks and you can rely on those few tricks, but you're not really as good as everybody else around you, then that's called imposter syndrome. And it is something that people that are super high performers suffer with pretty frequently, because they think that, well, I'm not really a high performer. They look around themselves. Everybody around me is a high performer. I don't really belong here. I just kind of got lucky a few times. Hearing that, does that strike a chord with you?
Parts of it, I think. Not all of it.
Okay.
I think for me, it probably more comes from the fact that, especially in the early days where there wasn't racing, you just had yourself as a reference point. Just sort of, this is me, I can imagine here. So I'll get here, and then I can imagine up here. And so I get here, and then, on and on and on. And so it's always sort of been, well, you don't know where you're at against someone until you go up with them in a race. So I think for me, I don't know, it might be a bit cliche. I just don't tend to rank people. It's not what I do. I don't know why. It's just.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with either way. For some reason, I think my brain's just weird.
I just think I think it's super interesting to me, and maybe I'm totally off base and totally in the wrong about the whole imposter syndrome thing, but if I talk to Evan, if I talk to Vanover, they're like, yeah, 100%, I'm one of the best. And then every time I've ever seen an interview with you or heard you talk or seen a YouTube video, it's like, yeah, I'm okay. And it's like, damn, dude, you're like, you're one of the top 4 pilots in the world, right? Like, what the hell? Own that. And it's always been funny to me. And I mean, there's a ton that can be said for humility, right? But it's always struck me as pretty funny. Like you definitely carry yourself with a different air compared to, a Vanover or an Evan, I'm not really talked to or seen much of Min Chan or the other 2 that you mentioned. But it's always struck me as very interesting. And I actually, in full disclosure, I had a little bit of a conversation with your dad today, and he kind of put me on this track of questioning. Incidentally, he didn't realize he was doing it. But yeah, I mean, why, for you, I guess what would you consider good enough to be the top for you?
Oh, the top in today's pilots, or are you talking about the top?
I mean, whatever you want to call the top.
For me,
or maybe a better. Go ahead.
Yeah, what are you saying?
I was going to say, maybe a better question is, do you think you can ever attain what you think is the top?
Yes, 100%. I believe I can attain what I achieve is the best. Yeah, definitely. There's no 2 ways about it. I believe it. I believe every part of it, and that's why I exist to do this. My vision of the top is basically perfect control of where you are in space and time, and where you're facing, how fast you're traveling, and where you'll be in that next instance of space and time. That's what I'm trying to achieve. So I have a very big deviance from that goal right now, but I can imagine it. So I keep working towards it.
So all right. So I'm gonna reflect this back to you, and you tell me if this sounds credible or sane. You want to understand to an infinite precision what your relationship is with both time and space, and moving your quad through that time and space in a series of perfect maneuvers such that you never leave that infinite space of precision.
Yes. That's my goal.
Does that sound attainable?
It doesn't sound attainable, but then you also think about it from the flip side of that. I mean, is there anything saying it's impossible, right? You just keep like going, okay, this is what went wrong this time. We removed that possibility. This went wrong this time. Remove that possibility. Just keep progressively removing probabilities of things going wrong until eventually, well, who knows where we end up? We won't know until we push to it, right?
Yeah, but so, I mean,
for me, that's what I enjoy.
Well, the funny thing, in like hearing all that talk about, you were talking about, Trappy and the guy, the dev from Betaflight, and you're basically finding bugs in the code, or not even bugs, things that are not optimized fully.
Yeah.
Based on the feel and how you fly.
Yeah.
Like you have to be faster than the processor to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, that to me, that's insane. Like, you're sitting there talking about that, and I'm like, this guy is actually outflying a processor dedicated to flight.
I think some stuff you can feel there. It depends to what degree. There's sort of, the way I feel it, you either have, this is one of those sort of hypothetical things, right? I have a lot of thoughts, like, I'm going to do the full preface thing I do usually when I talk this stuff. Like, I really have a belief in sort of a fluid mindset, right? The world's like dynamic. It's not mechanical. English and like mathematics is a mechanical way to understand what happins around us, right? Mm-hmm. But everything is very dynamic. It's not black and white. There's like a whole range.
There's shades of gray.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Wait, what was the original question? I just realized.
So you're outflying. You're out. Yeah. You are. You as a human. Say again. Yeah, you're outperforming. Yeah, you're outperforming the flight controller with feeling.
Okay, so I feel like, and this is sort of, I think, it's part of what determines how you handle a quad.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of enough sensitivity to tell something is different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Something's not what you expected. You change quads, something feels different.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's enough sensitivity that you can tell what the difference is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point where you can go, okay, I've got two quads, they feel different. I like this one more. Or just like, they just feel different. One of them I can fly, one I can't. And then you sort of like, you think you want to be not sensitive to that, right? So that way you just sort of push through it. But if you crank up the sensitivity further and listen more to what's wrong, then you can go, oh, the camera tilt's a little bit different. Okay, I have to put in these inputs to account for it. So by sort of making yourself more sensitive to the problems, you can see what's happening and then correct for it. And therefore now what you couldn't do before, you can do with anything. And I feel like sort of as you fly more and sort of crank up that sensitivity to really sort of analyze while you're flying what's happening. I mean, we have black box logs now, which help a lot too. But even before then, when it was purely by feel and I was just going, this is what feels different. And then the dev would come up and be like, oh, actually, this is what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's one of those things that's hard to describe, but I feel like it's very much, you just sort of got to really feel it out.
Mm-hmm.
But you can. Yeah, I think if you want a good example, DRL quads are really like the RACER 4. They've got like, you can tell they're tracking your inputs, like especially in a straight, you can tell they're tracking your inputs, but you can really feel like they're sort of not like, they're sort of missing the mark a little bit and then they catch up. Yeah. Like oscillating on the path. But I feel like you can feel that with everything if you like sort of turn up that sensitivity and really, you know, I guess fly a lot.
What yeah, it just I don't know. Like I think what you're describing gets you past the first step, right? Which is, okay, well, I went from flight 1 and then I went to beta flight, and I noticed that beta flight was different. And you know, your mindset is reproducibility, and you noticed right away I can't reproduce what I've been doing with flight 1. So you go back to the dev. Dev says, "Yeah, you're actually right. Let's make this change." But how many more cycles did you go through? Right? Like all of a sudden you change radios and you're like, oh, the radio's off. I don't, it's not a common skill. Like I don't really know anybody else that could probably do that.
I think,
I mean, maybe a Vanover or an Evan could. I don't know.
I think for me, it might have came from the fact that before when we were a review channel, right? So before I was racing, we were just reviewing things. We got these new 1806 motors from Dragonfly, for example. Here's how they compare to the RCX and whatever. Yeah. So I think probably from then I was always having different setups. And so it was always like, you know, trying to fly everything well and try to fly everything to its fullest. Probably also because I do a lot of data collection for HQ, T-Motor, RunCam, Foxio, like, you know, all different companies and stuff, you know, whether I'm sponsored by them or not. It's very much for me learning how to find things like where they're optimal. Probably the best example I can give is propellers, because a lot of people, you know, like this propeller, not like this propeller, but like knowing why is such a different thing. Where there was, I can't remember what it was. I think it wasn't a propeller, it was a T-Motor. It was the F60 Pro 2s. I was on the F40s. F60 Pro 2s, I was testing them for production. And like, you could tell they were fast in a straight line. But for some reason on track, I just couldn't get down to the same lap times, right? It just wasn't working. I was using more throttle to achieve the same thing. The battery was going down more. It just wasn't really working. Then there was one day we had a track set up at Eastside FPV on a practice day. It was just me and 3 other guys and my dad. And all of a sudden I come around this sort of medium-sized sweeper onto a really big straight, and this thing just like went through perfectly. Like just everything I wanted. Didn't use that much throttle. Didn't have to use that much turn in. This thing just turned straight in, straight through the corner. I'm on the straight, right on the throttle. And I'd set like an equivalent lap time. And it was like, well, hang on a second, what just happened, right? And sort of replaying that corner over and over again and sort of feeling out, trying different throttle ranges and stuff. I sort of realized, hang on a second, this motor has an optimal throttle range where like it's really efficient and it's got a lot of torque. It's like there's a specific throttle band if you stay in it that this thing is freaking incredible. And with propellers, it's even more so, right? We have an airfoil that'll only operate well within a certain speed range, right?
Right. Yeah.
And then it's like, well, hang on a second. If you're turning it at X degrees a second, you're going to have a motor at 100% throttle, a motor at 2 motors at 60%, a motor at 40%, right? And so all of a sudden, you got all these different ranges that the propeller's working in, and you're trying to work out what degrees of rotation at what throttle range. Now the props are working optimally. At what point are they starting to flex? If you've reduced weight now, there's less loading on the propellers, so they're probably going to perform better. It's all of that stuff, I think, that's really taught me about that. And trying to fly things to their optimal. Where it's like you'll have a propeller that for 2 weeks you'll be trying it and it's just not working. It's not working. It's not as good. You go around a corner the right way and it's like, what the hell just happened? That thing just woke up and became a monster. And trying to sort of feel those ranges and work out, you know, how you're going to find that optimal range, how to stay in that optimal throttle range. Yeah, that's probably also why my flying style developed the way it is too.
Hearing you talk about this, it sounds like, I mean, it almost sounds like you're describing a sixth sense. Like, this is not anything I've ever experienced, right? I have never heard. I mean, maybe I'm certain, you know, certainly, obviously, you're not like, you know, you don't have like some sixth sense, but you know, I've talked to a lot of the top pilots, and I don't think I've ever heard anybody describe what you're talking about, right? Which is the fight for reproducibility and the understanding enough of the feel to be able to translate that back into things like aerodynamics and, you know, optimal throttle curves. And, you know, I don't know. It's kind of amazing to hear you talk about it. Like, this is,
I don't know. That's things I've always felt. It's like, I mean, I don't know if you've ever felt it where you've gotten into like a really good rhythm with a quad, right? It's all of a sudden, it's sort of the point where you take a back seat and it's like you're not flying anymore, but the sticks are just moving and it's just, you're just like watching the show unfold, right?
So, you know, it's funny.
When that happens, it's weird because then it's like, you know, if I'm not inside the quad, right? I don't have a feeling of what the quad's doing. Like I'm not physically connected to it, but yet you sort of from the video do get a feel of what's happening. Like you can almost just start pulling more data out of it of what you're seeing and what's happening. Yeah.
So, you know, it's really funny. I know a lot of other pilots would describe that as the flow state, right? Especially freestyle pilots.
That's like the closest thing I've heard to what I felt.
Yeah. And so, you know, I had a conversation with Drew Camden one time, and he was like, we were talking about something, and he made a comment about the flow state, and I made some remark, and he just kind of looked at me. I was like, well, have you never experienced that? I was like, no, not at all. never done it. No, there's definitely times where, like, you know, I remember when I first started flying, I thought about the controller in my hands, right, and where my sticks were, and like I don't think about any of that now. I just point the quad where I want to go, and I go there. Yeah. But I have experienced a flow state in terms of music. So I'm a musician, and there's this thing that happens when, you know, you're singing with a group of people or you're doing something, and it could be just you and your guitar, it could be you and a couple other people, or you and a full band. And there's this moment where all of a sudden it all locks into place and it becomes its own thing. It is not an addition of each individual part. It becomes a singular entity. And it sounds like what you're describing.
Yeah, that's like basically the feeling. It's like you're connected to everything, and it's like almost everything's talking to you, and you're able to, like, you're just sort of a part of it. It's a really cool feeling. I feel like outside of FPV, the only other times I've experienced that was occasionally in gaming, where I'd sort of get to the point where it was like I would almost be just predicting ahead of everything, and I just was super like calm, and it was just weird. It was like, how is this even happening? The only other time that's sort of more recent for me is when I was driving my car. My car's manual, and so whenever I'm driving, I pretty much do the same kind of analysis I do to my flying with my driving. It's just what I do. It's what I enjoy. And there was this one time where I don't know what happened, but it was like a 2-week period where I was just driving a lot, right? The weather was perfect, so I was just always out driving from here to there, taking my parents wherever. And just like there was one point where just like all my gear changes just started becoming really perfect, and I wasn't focusing on the driving anymore. I knew exactly where all the cars were around me, and I was just like super comfortable. Like I wasn't doing anything crazy, right? Obviously, because it's a public road, but like I was just like I could not make a wrong gear change. And it was just incredible. That was like the closest thing I've felt to that outside of FPV. Although in FPV, I feel like for me it happens a lot more often. Probably just because I do FPV a lot more often, and I'm sort of always thinking about it. So
yeah. Well, I will tell you, I'm looking forward to maybe one day in the next 5 to 10 years experiencing flow state when I fly FPV.
I reckon you'll do it.
But I will say, like, having experienced it in music, like I have at least some tangential relation to it.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's just, I don't know, hearing you describe it, hearing you talk about it. I suspect there is something special there that you do, that you feel, whatever it is, whatever we call this thing. So I don't know. It leads me back to that question of like, okay, well, if you can do all that, why wouldn't you put yourself in the top right away? And so it just, I don't know. It's just kind of one of those things. I'm like, and maybe that's just your makeup, right? But like, I think it's very cool what you described, and I also think it's very nice that you just don't immediately jump yourself to the top. So,
thanks.
Yeah. You know, occasionally I get to do these interviews, and I come out of it just floored. This is one of them, right? But this one, the interesting thing about this one is typically when I come out of a conversation where I'm totally floored, it has nothing to do with drones at all. The time that I talked to Bot Grinder about him being a hobo, where he just dropped it on me. Oh yeah, well, you know, I used to ride trains for 20, 15 years, whatever. The times that Chad Nowak and I have talked where we didn't even talk about the fact that he's acknowledged as one of the best freestyle pilots in the world. We talked about him and his life and his struggles, right? This conversation with Thomas is the first time that I can remember, and I might be wrong, the first time I've just been truly floored, where I'm in the middle of the interview thinking, this is why I do it. This is what I wanted to get to. This is as deep as I've always wanted to go and to understand. And for a moment, I was able to see what the world must look like to a top racer. And folks, it is a radically different thing than what I experience on a day-to-day basis. I hope you loved it. I hope you enjoyed it. One of my favorite outtakes ever. And I just want to thank Thomas for coming on. That was amazing. Last thing we finish up, just a little bit of fun. What's it like to be FPV famous, right? I mean, FPV famous is great, right? All right, talk to you soon. Bye.